Isabella Turner had always prided herself on being able to handle tough situations with grace, but today was different. She sat at a small cafe on the corner of Fifth and Pine, her hands trembling as she stared at her phone. The screen displayed a message from her now ex-boyfriend, Ryan. "Can we talk?" it read. That simple text, innocuous as it seemed, ripped open a wound she thought had already healed. Just an hour ago, she had walked in on Ryan laughing with another woman, their chemistry palpable, and her heart had shattered. It wasn't the first time she had caught him in lies, but this felt different. This was betrayal. She thought she had seen it coming, but nothing could prepare her for the raw hurt that came crashing over her like a tidal wave. Her mind was reeling, each thought swirling around in a blur of anger, disappointment, and frustration. She could barely focus on anything as she picked up her phone to respond. But the words wouldn't come. Instead, she shoved the device into her bag, and as she did, her hand brushed against the edge of her coffee cup, sending it tipping over. The dark liquid splashed across the table and dripped onto her lap. "Great," she muttered under her breath. She grabbed a napkin, frantically dabbing at her clothes, but the mess only seemed to grow. Her scarf, draped casually over her chair, slipped off the back and fell unnoticed to the floor. Across the cafe, Nathaniel Blake, a quiet and reserved man with a reputation for staying out of the spotlight, noticed the falling scarf. His instincts kicked in, and without a second thought, he picked it up. He stepped toward Isabella, intending only to return it. He could tell she was upset, her face flushed with emotion, and as he neared her table, he didn't want to intrude, but felt it was the right thing to do. Before he could speak, Isabella looked up. Her eyes, bloodshot with frustration, fixed on him, and for a brief moment, her anger flared. Without thinking, without even a moment's hesitation, she slapped him across the face. The sound of her palm meeting his skin echoed through the cafe, and for an instant, the entire room went silent. The rush of embarrassment hit her instantly. She realized her mistake too late. She hadn't seen his calm demeanor, nor did she notice the faint glint of amusement in his eyes. To her, he was just another person approaching too closely, another potential threat in a world that seemed to be crashing down around her. Nathaniel paused, his expression unreadable. Slowly, he rubbed his cheek where the slap had landed, the sting a minor inconvenience. He wasn't angry. In fact, he was almost amused by how quickly she had acted. But instead of confronting her, he simply gave a small shrug, like it didn't matter. He turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Isabella mortified. The sting of the slap wasn't what hurt her most. It was the realization that she had just made an utter fool of herself in front of a complete stranger. But before she could gather herself, he was gone. The cafe was still silent, the tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. Isabella took a deep breath and looked around the room. No one seemed to be paying her any more attention, but she could feel the heat of humiliation creeping up her neck. She closed her eyes, counting to 10 in an attempt to calm her racing heart. She had to go. She couldn't stay here any longer. As she gathered her things, she noticed her scarf lying on the floor. She picked it up, still shaken, and left the cafe, vowing to never let her emotions control her like that again. But deep down, she knew she'd never forget this moment. She'd slapped the wrong guy. A week passed, and Isabella couldn't shake the feeling of embarrassment from that day at the cafe. She had tried to put it out of her mind, focusing on the practicalities of life, applying for jobs, attending interviews. But the memory of Nathaniel's calm demeanor stuck with her. She couldn't stop wondering who he was and what kind of man could shrug off an incident like that so effortlessly. And then, just when she thought she was getting over it, she received an email that knocked her off balance. It was from Blake Innovations, the tech company she had applied to for an internship. She had almost forgotten about it, given how many applications she had sent out in the past few weeks. The email read, "We are pleased to inform you that we have selected you for an interview. Please join us at our headquarters tomorrow at 10 a.m. Isabella's heart raced. This was her big break, an internship at one of the most successful tech firms in the city. But as soon as the excitement settled in, a familiar feeling of dread crept over her. Blake Innovations. Nathaniel Blake. Was there any chance he would remember her? What would she do if he was there? The next morning, Isabella arrived at the sleek, modern headquarters of Blake Innovations. The building towered over the city like a symbol of success and ambition, its glass walls reflecting the bright sun. Isabella's hands were clammy as she entered the building, where she was greeted by a polite receptionist who escorted her to the waiting area. She sat nervously, going over her qualifications in her head, trying to remind herself that she was there for a reason. But her nerves were getting the best of her. She had no idea what to expect. Minutes later, the door opened, and a man in a sharp suit walked in. Isabella's stomach dropped. It was Nathaniel. His eyes met hers for a split second, and she froze. He didn't react as he stood in the doorway, but she could see the faintest flicker of recognition in his gaze. She quickly stood up, trying to compose herself. Her heart pounded as she silently prayed that he wouldn't bring up the incident at the cafe. "Miss Turner?" Nathaniel's voice was smooth and professional, with none of the warmth she had expected. "Yes," Isabella managed, forcing a smile. "It's nice to meet you." The tension between them was thick, but neither of them mentioned the slap. Instead, Nathaniel gestured for her to follow him into the conference room. As they sat down, the interview began like any other, but the undercurrent of awkwardness was impossible to ignore. Isabella could barely focus on the questions he asked, her mind distracted by the memory of their last encounter. Half an hour later, the interview ended, and Nathaniel stood up, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming, Miss Turner. You'll hear from us soon." She shook his hand, doing her best to maintain her composure. As she left the room, she felt both relieved and confused. She hadn't said anything about the slap, and he hadn't either. But there was something about the way he had looked at her, something that made her wonder if he was silently judging her. Later that afternoon, Isabella received an email from Blake Innovations offering her the internship. It was a victory, but the fact that she would be working directly with Nathaniel made her stomach churn with uncertainty. Her heart and mind were in a whirlwind of emotions as she accepted the offer, unsure of what to expect next. Isabella walked into her first day at Blake Innovations with a mix of anticipation and dread. She was determined to make the most of this internship, despite the tension hanging between her and Nathaniel. The idea of working with him, after what had happened at the cafe, made her stomach turn. She could only hope that things would eventually return to normal, even if she knew that her mistake might have left a lasting impression. The office was sleek and modern, filled with young professionals buzzing with energy. It felt worlds away from the small cafe where she had slapped Nathaniel, the memory still sharp in her mind. She kept her head down, focused on settling in, trying to avoid any further encounters with him. Her desk was set up near the back of the office, away from the chaos, and for that, she was grateful. She needed to gather herself and focus on proving her worth. But Nathaniel made it clear, from the moment he walked into the office that morning, that things would not be easy. He didn't look at her more than once, never acknowledged her presence unless it was necessary for business. His eyes were always cool and distant when they met, a coldness that made her skin prickle. Isabella couldn't tell if he was deliberately ignoring her or if he was simply indifferent, but it was clear that the incident at the cafe was something he hadn't forgotten. Throughout the first week, Nathaniel remained professional, but there was an air of frostiness whenever they interacted. He never mentioned the slap, but his behavior spoke louder than any words could have. Every time she attempted to make eye contact, he would look away quickly, his sharp gaze cold and unreadable. It hurt more than Isabella cared to admit. She had made a mistake, yes, but she hadn't meant to disrespect him. Yet here she was, stuck in a corporate setting where her past mistake was seemingly all he could remember. The few times they did speak were brief and functional. She would ask a question about a project, and he would provide a succinct answer. There were no pleasantries, no small talk, just business. It was like she was nothing more than an employee to him, a role she had earned through hard work and qualifications, not a human being with emotions and a genuine desire to do well. Isabella threw herself into her work, determined to prove that she was more than the woman who had slapped the wrong guy. She worked long hours, staying late at the office to finish assignments, trying to stay out of Nathaniel's path as much as possible. Her desk was stacked with papers and reports, her mind occupied by numbers and deadlines. She wanted to show him that she was competent, capable, and, above all, deserving of this opportunity. But despite her best efforts, the coldness between them never thawed. It was as though an invisible wall had been erected, and no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't seem to break through it. There were times when she wanted to speak to him, to apologize properly, and clear the air, but something held her back. What if he didn't want to hear it? What if he didn't care? And what if, deep down, he still thought of her as nothing more than a mistake? It was a terrifying thought. Isabella's confidence began to waver. The pressure of the job and the strain of working so closely with Nathaniel, coupled with the nagging guilt over what had happened, made her feel more isolated than ever. She didn't know how to fix things between them, and the constant tension gnawed at her, keeping her on edge. She couldn't escape the feeling that she was walking on eggshells, waiting for the next misstep. A few weeks into her internship, Blake Innovations was faced with a major crisis. A project that had been in the works for months had hit an unexpected snag, and deadlines were fast approaching. Nathaniel, as the CEO, was under immense pressure to fix things. His usually calm and collected demeanor was fraying at the edges, and the entire office could feel the shift in the atmosphere. The once lively office now buzzed with anxiety, every employee trying to do their part to get the project back on track. Isabella, despite the cold shoulder she had received from Nathaniel, found herself in the thick of things. She had been working diligently on her tasks, hoping to prove herself, and now the stakes were higher than ever. As the team scrambled to resolve the issues, Nathaniel called for an urgent meeting to discuss the next steps. Isabella entered the conference room, her stomach twisted with nerves. Nathaniel was already there, standing at the front, his eyes focused on the large screen displaying the project details. The tension was palpable. Isabella could feel his gaze lingering on her for just a moment as she took her seat. The unspoken weight of their previous interactions was impossible to ignore. As the meeting progressed, the discussion turned to the challenges they were facing and how they could possibly solve them. The team was struggling to come up with any viable solutions, and the room grew quieter with each passing minute. Nathaniel's frustration was evident, his brow furrowed as he scanned the room, looking for anyone who could offer a breakthrough. Then, something unexpected happened. Isabella, who had been listening intently, raised her hand. "I think I have an idea," she said, her voice steady but tinged with uncertainty. Nathaniel looked at her for a long moment, his gaze cool but calculating. He had no reason to take her seriously. She was just an intern, after all. But for some reason, he nodded, giving her the floor. Isabella took a deep breath and explained her idea, an approach that was bold, creative, and completely outside the box. She outlined how they could pivot their current strategy and incorporate new technology that hadn't been considered yet. She could see the skepticism in the room, but Nathaniel's eyes remained fixed on her. He didn't interrupt or dismiss her. He just listened. When she finished, the room was silent for a long moment. Then Nathaniel spoke. "It's a risk," he said, his voice low, "but it could work." He turned to the team. "We'll try it. Let's put Isabella's plan into action and see what happens." Isabella's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't believe what she had just heard. Nathaniel, the man who had barely acknowledged her existence up until now, had actually taken her seriously. He hadn't dismissed her idea out of hand. For the first time since she had started working at Blake Innovations, Isabella felt like she had earned his respect. It wasn't just the fact that he had listened to her. It was the way he had given her a chance to prove herself. The team quickly got to work on implementing her plan, and as the days went by, things began to look up. The project started to turn around, and deadlines were met. Isabella worked alongside the team, tirelessly ensuring everything ran smoothly. And as the days passed, she noticed something subtle but significant. Nathaniel was starting to look at her differently. He would nod in approval when she solved a problem or offered an insight. His demeanor was less cold, more professional, and his interactions with her felt more like collaboration than avoidance. The change was gradual, but it was there. Isabella could see that Nathaniel was starting to recognize her for the hardworking, competent woman she was, not just the one who had made a mistake all those weeks ago. But there was still a long way to go. The past was never far from her mind, and she couldn't help but wonder if this newfound respect would be enough to erase the memory of the slap. Would she ever be able to fully redeem herself in Nathaniel's eyes? Only time would tell. The days following Isabella's successful proposal were a blur of intense work and long nights at Blake Innovations. Her plan had ignited a fire of hope among the team, and there was a renewed sense of energy in the office. As the project advanced, it became clear that her idea had helped push the company forward, resolving issues that had once seemed insurmountable. But despite the external success, Isabella couldn't help but feel the weight of her earlier actions hanging over her. Nathaniel's approval, though significant, didn't erase the tension between them, and she couldn't shake the feeling that there was still a divide between them, one that couldn't be so easily bridged. Nathaniel's behavior toward her had shifted subtly in the days that followed the meeting. He no longer avoided eye contact or dismissed her contributions. In fact, he seemed to seek her out more often, even if it was just to ask for her opinion on a minor detail. His respect, though hard-earned, was palpable. Isabella could tell he was starting to see her for more than just the intern who had slapped him in a moment of anger. Yet, she still longed for something more. A deeper connection, a genuine acknowledgement of her as a person, not just an employee. It was late one evening when the opportunity to prove herself further presented itself. The project was nearing its final stages, and the pressure had only intensified. The team was working frantically to meet the deadline, and everyone was exhausted. Isabella, too, had reached her limit, but she refused to let up. This was her moment to shine, and she wasn't going to let anything slip through her fingers. Her phone buzzed as she sat at her desk, the glow of her screen illuminating the dim office. She glanced down at the notification. It was a message from Nathaniel. "Can you meet me in my office?" Her heart raced. Nathaniel had rarely spoken to her outside of work, and the request felt both unsettling and intriguing. She stood up from her desk, smoothing out the wrinkles in her blouse before making her way toward his office. The familiar tension returned as she approached the door, the memories of their first encounter lingering in her mind like an unwelcome ghost. "Come in," Nathaniel's voice called from inside. She opened the door to find him standing near the window, looking out over the city skyline. The office was quiet, save for the sound of the rain pattering against the glass. Nathaniel turned as she entered, his usual cool demeanor in place. But there was something different in his eyes. A flicker of something softer, something more vulnerable than she had ever seen. "Is everything okay with the project?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "Everything's fine," he replied, his gaze steady, "but I wanted to talk to you about something." Isabella's pulse quickened. Was he about to reprimand her? Was he unhappy with her work? 1,000 scenarios raced through her mind. "I've been watching your progress," he continued, his voice calm but intense. "You've really stepped up. Your idea was a game changer, and your work ethic has been impressive. I've seen how much you've put into this project." Isabella swallowed, trying to process his words. She had expected praise, but somehow, it still caught her off guard. This was Nathaniel Blake, a man who was known for being ruthlessly professional, and for him to acknowledge her effort so openly was a rare and unexpected gesture. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure of how to respond. Nathaniel studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "I don't know if I've ever told you this," he said, "but I can be a bit hard on people. I expect a lot, sometimes too much, but you've proven that you can handle it." Her heart swelled at his words, and she felt a glimmer of hope rise within her. This was it, the moment she had been working toward. For the first time, it felt like Nathaniel truly saw her. Not just as the intern who had made a mistake, but as someone capable of succeeding on her own merits. "I'm just trying to do my best," she replied, her voice thick with emotion. Nathaniel nodded, his gaze softening. "You're doing more than that," he said. "You're proving that you belong here." The praise was unexpected, but it was the most meaningful thing anyone had ever said to her in this office. She had spent so much time feeling like an outsider, unsure of whether she would ever be able to make a place for herself in this high-stakes world. But Nathaniel's words felt like validation, a sign that she had truly earned her place. As she stood there, trying to absorb the weight of his compliment, she felt a shift between them. The walls that had once separated them began to crumble. And for the first time, Isabella could see Nathaniel as more than just the CEO she had accidentally slapped. She saw him as a man who, like her, had his own struggles and insecurities. They were both fighting their own battles, each in their own way. "I appreciate everything you've done, Isabella," Nathaniel said, his voice low. "You're an asset to this company, and I'm looking forward to seeing where you go from here." Isabella couldn't help but smile. It wasn't just the compliment. It was the way he had acknowledged her as an equal. It was the validation she had craved since the moment they first met. For the first time, she felt like they were on the same team. The following week, the company celebrated the successful completion of the project that had once seemed doomed to fail. The office was filled with a buzz of excitement, and everyone was relieved that the deadline had been met. Nathaniel, typically stoic and composed, even cracked a smile as he congratulated the team. It was a rare sight, and Isabella couldn't help but notice how different he seemed in this moment of success. Gone was the cold, calculating CEO. Today, he seemed almost human. The atmosphere was festive, but Isabella couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Nathaniel than the image he projected. She had seen glimpses of it, the vulnerability, the cracks in his otherwise perfect facade, but it had always been fleeting. He was a man who hid behind his success, his wealth, and his reputation, but Isabella had begun to wonder if there was more to him than he let on. As the celebration wound down, Nathaniel approached her, his usual reserved demeanor now replaced with something more approachable. He gestured toward the balcony outside his office, and Isabella followed him. "I need a breath of fresh air," Nathaniel said, his voice surprisingly soft. "Care to join me?" Isabella agreed, her curiosity piqued. They stepped out onto the balcony, the cool night air wrapping around them as they looked out over the city. The view was stunning, the lights of the city twinkling like stars. For a moment, there was silence between them, comfortable and unforced. "I've never really talked about this," Nathaniel began, breaking the silence. "But sometimes I wonder if I'm doing all this for the wrong reasons." Isabella turned to look at him, surprised by his confession. Nathaniel Blake, CEO, billionaire, and self-made man, was opening up to her in a way she hadn't expected. "What do you mean?" she asked gently. Nathaniel leaned against the railing, his eyes fixed on the city below. "I've always been seen as my father's heir, the one who was supposed to take over the family business. But when I started Blake Innovations, I wanted to prove that I could succeed on my own, that I wasn't just living in my father's shadow." Isabella listened intently, sensing that this was a rare moment of honesty for Nathaniel. "That must have been tough," she said quietly, "to feel like you had to constantly prove yourself." Nathaniel nodded. "It still is, but sometimes I wonder if I'm chasing success for the right reasons. I've built this company, but at what cost? I've pushed people away, kept everyone at arm's length, even my own family." Isabella was taken aback. She had always seen Nathaniel as a man in control, someone who had everything figured out. To hear him admit that he had doubts about his path was unexpected, but it made him feel more real, more relatable. "You're not alone," she said softly. "I think we all have our doubts. I've made mistakes too, but we're all just trying to do our best." Nathaniel turned to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "Maybe you're right," he said quietly. "Maybe I've been too focused on the wrong things." The vulnerability in his voice surprised Isabella. For the first time, she saw Nathaniel as more than just the CEO who had once been distant and cold. She saw a man who had fought his own battles, who had made sacrifices along the way, and who, perhaps, was just as unsure of his path as she had been when she first started at the company. "I'm glad you came here," Nathaniel said after a long pause. "I think I've learned more from you than you realize." Isabella smiled, her heart warming at his words. "I've learned a lot from you, too." The night was quiet, but the connection between them felt anything but. They were no longer just a CEO and an intern. They were two people who had found common ground, despite their differences. And for the first time, Isabella felt hopeful about what the future might hold. The following weeks felt like a new chapter in Isabella's life. Nathaniel's unexpected vulnerability had shifted something between them. No longer did she see him as the untouchable CEO who only cared about numbers and results. There was now a quiet understanding between them, a sense of camaraderie that had been forged during those late-night talks when he had opened up to her in ways he had never done before. Though the office atmosphere had returned to its usual grind, something had changed in their dynamic. Nathaniel no longer viewed her as an intern who had made a fool of herself by slapping him on their first encounter. Instead, he had come to respect her, even admire her for the hard work and passion she put into every project. And it wasn't just about work anymore. They had developed a rapport that went beyond professional boundaries. Isabella found herself looking forward to their interactions. Nathaniel's subtle gestures, a brief smile when their eyes met across the room, the way he made an effort to include her in strategic discussions, spoke volumes. Yet she was still unsure of where they stood. Nathaniel had not overtly changed his demeanor around her, but there was an underlying warmth that hadn't been there before. It was late one Thursday evening when everything came to a head. Isabella had been working on a particularly difficult financial report when she felt a tap on her shoulder. She turned to find Nathaniel standing behind her, looking at her with that calm, measured gaze. "Isabella, can we talk for a moment?" he asked, his voice low. Her heart skipped a beat. Was this a meeting? A critique? Her mind raced, but she nodded and followed him to his office. The walls of the glass building were illuminated by the soft glow of city lights outside, casting a golden hue over everything. As they entered Nathaniel's office, she noticed the change in atmosphere, a tension in the air that hadn't been there before. "Is something wrong?" Isabella asked, her voice tentative. Nathaniel closed the door behind them and motioned for her to sit. "It's not that something is wrong," he said, his tone measured but serious. "It's that I need to be honest with you." She furrowed her brow. "Honest about what?" Nathaniel took a deep breath and sat across from her. "You've been an incredible asset to this company, Isabella. I've seen how much you've given, how much you've sacrificed, but I can't help but feel like I've been holding you back." Isabella blinked, unsure of how to respond. "What do you mean?" He leaned forward, his eyes focused on her with intensity. "I've been keeping you in this position as my assistant for far too long. You deserve more than that. You've proven time and time again that you're capable of leading projects, making critical decisions, and taking this company to the next level." Her chest tightened. Was he offering her a promotion? A new opportunity? She didn't want to get her hopes up, but her heart raced at the thought. "I don't want you to think I've been treating you like this because of your gender or because I didn't believe in you." "It's not that at all," Nathaniel continued, his voice softer now. "It's because I've been so focused on the company's success that I forgot to focus on the people who are truly driving it." His words hung in the air, and Isabella took a moment to process them. Was this Nathaniel Blake, this ruthless businessman, always sharp and distant, telling her that he had underestimated her? That he had been blind to her potential? "I want to offer you something," Nathaniel said, his eyes searching hers. "I want to promote you to Director of Operations. It's a big step up, but I'm confident you can handle it." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. She had never imagined that this moment would come so soon, that Nathaniel Blake would offer her such a significant role. The position of Director of Operations was coveted, and it meant she would be in charge of managing the company's day-to-day activities, overseeing key projects, and leading teams. It was a career-defining opportunity. "I don't know what to say," she whispered, her heart pounding in her chest. "This is more than I ever expected." Nathaniel smiled, a rare, genuine smile that made his face soften. "I know it's a big decision, but I believe in you, Isabella. You've earned this." She could hardly believe it. In one moment, everything had changed. The years of doubt, the constant questioning of her worth, all of it seemed to vanish. Nathaniel had finally recognized her for who she truly was, not just as an intern or an assistant, but as a capable leader in her own right. "I'll do everything I can to prove you're right," Isabella said, her voice steady with determination. Nathaniel nodded, standing up and extending his hand. "I know you will. This company is lucky to have you." Isabella shook his hand, feeling the weight of the moment. This wasn't just a career milestone. It was a personal victory. She had broken through the barriers that had once held her back, and now there was no stopping her. The following days were a whirlwind. Isabella was thrust into the role of director of operations almost immediately. She was given full control over several high-profile projects, and her responsibility increased tenfold. But with each challenge she faced, she grew more confident, more assertive. It felt like she was finally stepping into her own skin, no longer hiding behind the shadows of her colleagues, but leading the charge. Her newfound confidence didn't go unnoticed by Nathaniel either. He continued to support her, offering guidance when needed, but never micromanaging. There was an unspoken understanding between them now. He trusted her, and she had earned that trust. Yet, despite the professional success, something deeper began to stir inside Isabella. She couldn't ignore the way Nathaniel's presence affected her. There was an undeniable connection between them, something that went beyond the workplace. His occasional glances, the subtle touches of encouragement, everything pointed toward an attraction that neither of them had fully acknowledged. One afternoon, as the team gathered in the conference room for a major presentation, Isabella noticed Nathaniel watching her closely from across the table. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, the world outside the room seemed to fade. Her pulse quickened, her thoughts racing. What was this? What was happening between them? She pushed the thought aside and focused on the presentation. But when the meeting ended, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was shifting. Something was changing between them. Something that was no longer about work, but about the undeniable chemistry they shared. As the days passed, their interactions became more charged. The subtle glances turned into longer stares, and the occasional words of encouragement became more personal. Isabella felt a stirring deep within her, an attraction that she couldn't ignore, no matter how much she tried to focus on her career. But Nathaniel was still her boss, and she knew that crossing that line would complicate everything. The last thing she wanted was to jeopardize everything she had worked so hard for. Still, as the weeks wore on, Isabella found it increasingly difficult to ignore the pull between them, and deep down, she knew that sooner or later they would have to face it. The company gala was one of those events that Isabella had both anticipated and dreaded. On one hand, it was a celebration of the company's growth, a night to acknowledge the team's hard work and dedication. On the other hand, it was the night that everyone, management, staff, and clients, would gather in one place, dressed in their finest, exchanging pleasantries and making small talk. Isabella was no stranger to these events, but this one felt different. For the first time, she wasn't just an intern or assistant. She was someone important, someone whose opinions mattered. And yet, as much as she had grown within the company, there was still something unresolved between her and Nathaniel. She had done her best to push the thoughts of him aside, focusing instead on her role in her career. But there was no denying that the attraction between them had only intensified. It wasn't just the late-night meetings or the quiet moments shared over work discussions. It was something deeper. The way his eyes lingered on her, the subtle shifts in his tone whenever they spoke, made it impossible to ignore. She had worked hard to suppress her feelings, but tonight, standing in front of the full company, dressed in an elegant black dress that accentuated her newfound confidence, Isabella couldn't help but wonder, would tonight change everything? As she entered the grand ballroom, the glittering lights reflecting off the floor, she caught sight of Nathaniel across the room. He was dressed in his usual sharp suit, his posture commanding and assured as he spoke to several high-profile clients. But the moment their eyes met, a quiet shift occurred between them. For a brief second, it felt as though the rest of the world had vanished. She could feel the electricity between them, the unspoken tension that had been building for weeks. Trying to ignore the flutter in her chest, Isabella made her way toward the refreshments table, determined to remain focused on the night's event. However, as she turned to grab a drink, a voice behind her broke through her thoughts. "You look stunning tonight, Isabella." She froze at the sound of Nathaniel's voice, low and steady, yet carrying a weight of emotion she couldn't quite place. He was standing just behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. "Thank you," she replied, turning to face him. "You look great as well." There was a moment of silence before Nathaniel spoke again. "I've been thinking about you a lot lately, Isabella," he said, his tone softer than usual. Her heart skipped a beat. She looked up at him, meeting his eyes with a mix of surprise and curiosity. "What do you mean?" Nathaniel hesitated, his usual composed demeanor slipping for just a second. "I mean, I can't ignore how I feel about you anymore. This thing between us, it's not just about work, it's something more." Isabella's breath caught in her throat. His words hung in the air, and for a moment she felt as if the world had stopped spinning. The realization hit her like a wave. Nathaniel felt the same way. The attraction that had been simmering beneath the surface had finally come to light. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could respond, he took a step closer. "I know we've both been cautious. I know I've been your boss, and I never wanted to make things complicated for you. But I can't keep pretending that I don't feel this connection with you." The room seemed to grow quieter around her. Every instinct told her to say something, anything, to acknowledge the moment between them. But she was frozen, caught between the whirlwind of emotions she had kept hidden for so long. Nathaniel's hand reached out, gently brushing her arm, sending a jolt of warmth through her body. "Isabella, I'm not asking you to make a decision right now, but I need you to know that I want to be honest with you, and I think you deserve that." Isabella's mind was racing, her thoughts clouded with a mix of excitement, fear, and uncertainty. She had spent so long building her career, working tirelessly to prove herself. And now, standing in front of Nathaniel, she was confronted with a choice that went beyond professional ambition. Could she take the leap? Could she risk everything for a chance at something more? Before she could say anything, Nathaniel's expression softened, as though he had sensed her hesitation. "Let's talk about this later," he said gently, giving her a reassuring smile. "Enjoy the night, Isabella, and when you're ready, we'll figure this out." The days that followed the gala were filled with a mixture of excitement and confusion. Nathaniel's words echoed in Isabella's mind constantly, and she found it nearly impossible to focus on anything else. She had always prided herself on her ability to keep her personal life separate from her career, but now those two worlds felt inextricably linked in a way she hadn't anticipated. Nathaniel had given her the space to process everything, which only made her question her own feelings more. She had spent the past few years working relentlessly to prove herself, to carve out a place for herself in the business world. And now, here she was, facing the possibility of a relationship with the very man who had both mentored and challenged her. Was it worth the risk? Was it worth jeopardizing everything she had worked for? For the first time in a long while, Isabella found herself questioning her own priorities. She could stay focused on her career, continue to climb the corporate ladder, and enjoy the professional success she had earned. Or she could take a chance on Nathaniel, the man who had not only offered her a promotion, but had also opened his heart to her in ways that no one else had. One evening, as she sat alone in her apartment, her phone buzzed with a message from Nathaniel. It was simple, just a few words, but they held so much weight. "Isabella, we need to talk." Her heart raced. This was the moment she would either embrace the possibility of something more or continue down the path she had been walking for years. She stood up from the couch, pacing back and forth, trying to make sense of everything. Her career, her emotions, her future, all of it felt intertwined in a way she hadn't anticipated. Could she let go of the control she had over her life and take a leap of faith? Could she trust that what they shared was real? With a deep breath, she replied to his message. "I'll be there in an hour." As she headed out the door, Isabella knew that this conversation, this moment, would change everything. She wasn't sure how it would end, but she was ready to face it head on. No more running, no more hiding. And with that, she stepped into the unknown, ready for whatever came next. Isabella arrived at Nathaniel's apartment, her heart pounding in her chest. The rain had started to fall, a soft, steady drizzle that seemed to mirror her emotions. She stood at the entrance for a moment, taking a deep breath to steady herself before knocking on the door. When Nathaniel opened it, his usual composed expression softened into something more vulnerable, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. He stepped aside to let her in. "Come in, Isabella," he said quietly, gesturing toward the living room. The space was cozy, with warm lighting and a few books scattered on the coffee table. Nothing like the sleek, impersonal offices she was used to seeing him in. This was Nathaniel in his element. at home, away from the pressures of work. Isabella's heart fluttered at the intimacy of the moment. She had seen him as a leader, a mentor, a colleague, but never as someone in his own private world. It felt different now, more personal, more real. As she sat down on the couch, Nathaniel took the armchair across from her, his eyes searching hers for some sign of what she was thinking. They were both silent for a long moment, the weight of everything that had transpired hanging in the air between them. Finally, Nathaniel broke the silence. "I'm sorry, Isabella. I should have spoken to you sooner, not let things linger like this. I should have made sure you knew how much I valued you, both as an employee and as a person." His words hit her hard. She hadn't expected him to open up so quickly, but his vulnerability was impossible to ignore. It made her own walls crumble, the carefully constructed defenses she had built over the years to protect her heart suddenly feeling fragile and unnecessary. "I'm sorry too," Isabella said, her voice steady, though her heart was racing. "I've been trying to protect myself. I didn't want to lose my focus, my career, but I can't deny how I feel about you. I was afraid that if I let my guard down, everything I've worked for would crumble." Nathaniel leaned forward, his expression softening. "I understand that fear. I've felt it too. But we can't live our lives just avoiding risks, avoiding what could be. Sometimes you have to take a leap, even if it's scary." Isabella felt a warmth spreading through her chest at his words. The sincerity in his voice, the depth of his understanding, it was all so unexpected, yet so comforting. She had spent so long holding everything together, controlling every aspect of her life. But now, with Nathaniel, it felt like she could finally let go. "I want to take that leap with you, Nathaniel," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm ready to see where this could go. But I need to know that we can build something real, something that's not just based on this tension between us. I need to know that we're on the same page." Nathaniel smiled, a genuine, warm smile that made her heart flutter. "We are. We've always been. I've just been too blind to see it until now. I want us to build something, Isabella. Something that's ours, outside of work, outside of expectations." Her heart soared. It was everything she had hoped for, everything she had dreamed of, but was too afraid to admit. She had finally found someone who saw her for who she was, who understood her fears, her ambitions, and was willing to meet her halfway. They both sat there in silence, but this time, it was a comfortable silence. There were no more walls between them, no more doubts. They both knew that this was just the beginning of something new, something beautiful. The days following their conversation were filled with change. Nathaniel and Isabella worked together to navigate their new dynamic, blending their personal connection with their professional relationship. It wasn't easy. There were moments of awkwardness where the lines between the two worlds blurred, but slowly they found a rhythm. Isabella's confidence continued to grow, both in her work and in her relationship with Nathaniel. She was no longer just the intern, the assistant, or the overachiever striving to prove herself. She was an equal, a partner, and Nathaniel treated her as such. He respected her opinion, sought her advice, and never once tried to diminish her accomplishments. Together, they began to reshape Pierce Innovations into a more inclusive, innovative company. Their shared vision allowed them to see the business from different angles, each bringing something unique to the table. Nathaniel's drive for success was tempered by Isabella's creativity and empathy, creating an atmosphere of collaboration that had been missing for far too long. As the months passed, their bond only deepened. They spent more time together outside of work, exploring the city, enjoying quiet dinners, and sharing their hopes and fears for the future. Every moment they spent together only strengthened their connection, and Isabella began to realize that she had found something more than just love. She had found a partner, someone who truly understood her, supported her, and challenged her in the best way possible. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Nathaniel's apartment watching the sun set over the city, he turned to her, his expression serious but soft. "Isabella," he said, his voice low and steady, "I want you to know that you're not just my partner in business. You're my partner in life, and I'm ready to take that step with you. No more hesitation, no more second guessing. I want you by my side, now and always." Tears welled in Isabella's eyes as she looked at him, her heart overflowing with emotion. She had come so far, from the young woman trying to prove herself in a man's world to the confident, capable woman standing beside the man she loved. "I'm ready to," she said softly, taking his hand in hers. "I'm ready for whatever comes next, as long as it's with you." And with that, they knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. This was the beginning of something real, a love built on trust, respect, and a shared vision for the future. And no matter what obstacles they encountered, they knew they would always have each other. The story that had started with a moment of tension and doubt had transformed into a journey of love, growth, and endless possibilities. The leap they had taken together had led them to a future neither of them could have imagined, a future they were both ready to embrace, side by side. The story of Nathaniel and Isabella is not just one of misunderstandings and mistakes, but of growth, love, and mutual understanding. They overcame the barriers of their past, the doubts and hesitations, to find a love that transcended fame and societal expectations. Looking back on the long journey they've taken, from awkward moments, awkward apologies, to acceptance and respect for one another, they realize that love is not about perfection, but about companionship through challenges and overcoming together. Today, as they gaze at the sunset from their balcony, hands clasped tightly, no more words are needed. All they understand is that they have found each other in this world. A love that is true, built on patience, trust, and genuine moments of sharing. The road ahead may still hold many difficulties, but they know that as long as they have each other, they can overcome anything. Both are ready to embrace a bright future, full of new dreams and desires. And in a world where love and work often conflict, they have proven that when two people truly understand each other, they can create a future together, full of happiness and success. Nathaniel and Isabella are not just lovers, but life companions, building a future together, not only in career, but in love, understanding, and the sweet moments they share. And in the end, that is the true happiness. Thank you so much for following Nathaniel and Isabella's journey all the way to the end. We hope their story has touched your heart and inspired you as much as it has inspired us to share it. If you enjoyed this journey and want to see more stories like this, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a new video. Your support means the world to us, and we're so grateful to have you as part of this amazing community. If you have any thoughts or feedback, feel free to leave a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.